Welcome to episode 3 of Untangled Minds, making sense of the mess one thread at a time. Life with ADHD, autism, and other neurodivergent experiences can feel tangled, chaotic, and overwhelming. I'm Deanna, a therapist, writer, mom, and intuitive, and I know firsthand what it's like to hold both the struggle and the beauty of having one of these brains. In this podcast, we'll explore the intersections of neurodivergence, attachment, relationships, parenting, and healing. Through story, strategy, and soulful conversation, we'll untangle shame, celebrate strengths, and create space for authenticity. If you've ever felt like too much, like you're not enough, or simply different, this is your place to breathe, laugh, and belong. So, episode 3. It's actually so much fun. I love doing this. Today we're going to talk about today's episode is going to talk about a topic that I stumbled upon and I got a little giggle out of. And so welcome to Raised to Play a Role, Birth Order, Archetypes, and Attachment. I was having a conversation yesterday with one of my friends, and we were talking about everything going on in my life, and let me tell you, there's a lot. And I just kind of giggled because we were talking and I was like, well, being the middle child, I definitely have that middle child syndrome. And he was like, well, aren't you the oldest? Actually, I think he said, are you the youngest? And I was like, no, I'm the middle child. And he's like, but I was like, I have an older sister. I have an older brother. I have a younger brother who's like 2 years younger than me. And then I have like my little baby brother. And he's like, wow, I didn't realize that. And we were talking and I was like, yeah, like I have that total middle child syndrome. Like, the one who had to be the perfect golden child in order to get attention and was the problem solver and hold the family together. I was the glue. And then I was like, yeah, but you know what? I also have that like take care of everybody mentality, like the oldest child. And then I was like, well, I kind of was the oldest child too in a way because my sister was 7 years older than me. And she left the house when I was around, probably about 7. And then I became the oldest child in the home. And I was like, so I guess I got middle child syndrome and oldest child syndrome. And my friend laughs and goes, that must be why you're so messed up. And I just started to laugh. And I was like, you're right. I am messed up. But you know what? That's okay because I am messed up, but I'm also healing. And that's okay. So, sibling archetypes. We all know somebody who's got the bossy oldest sibling, the overlooked middle child, and the spoiled youngest child, right? But these aren't just jokes. They're actually the blueprint for your personality, your career, and even your other relationships and your love life. Birth order is like the original personality test. Forget Myers-Briggs or the anagrams. Like your siblings decided who you were before you ever had a say. So this episode, is completely dedicated to the core 4, the oldest, middle, youngest, and only child. And then I'm going to give you a few bonus archetypes that kind of apply to any of those children based on family dynamics. Typical things like the ACE scores that we all know about. And I'm going to set us up because we're going into a mini series. Whoop, whoop. We're going to take and we're going to bridge this into attachment theory. Gotta love attachment theory. So, buckle up. It's going to be quite the ride for this episode in this mini series. This episode might be a little bit longer than my other ones, and then the mini episodes are probably going to be normal. So let's be real, they're not really mini. So let's start. So, like I said, core 4, right? You've got the oldest child, the middle child, the youngest child, and the only child. The oldest child, right? You've got the parents, these kids, like, they're the first kid into the home. The parents are usually like the strictest. Think like helicopter parent. This is when mom and dad have that trial run. Like, the baby book usually starts with child number one. For everything in the first 2-3 pages of the baby book is filled out. And this child, the oldest kid, is usually expected to like take care of their siblings, right? Think like they're the protect them on the playground and beat up the other kids at the bus stop. And there's nothing wrong with that, right? There's nothing wrong with expecting your kids to have this like protector mentality. However, it doesn't necessarily always do well for them later in life. So, being the oldest child, the protector, you're growing strengths from a young age that include like leadership skills, being organized, reliable, being very like achievement driven and like wanting to accomplish all of the things to like get that like gold star. But these strengths, for everything that they are, have a flip side. So here's the thing. Every strength that we have as a human being has a reverse negative side effect or a reverse like wound. And the stress and pressure that comes from these strengths, the leadership, the organization, the reliability, the expectation of perfection, leads most of these people to have tendencies towards perfection, a significant fear of failure, feeling pressured to perform and be perfect the first time. And because of that, it also tends to lead to controlling tendencies. So like you're talking about the tendency to control how other people act, talk, or respond, because if they're unpredictable, then you might be thrown off and it might complicate the perfectionism that you're going for, right? A lot of the times when you move into adulthood and other relationships, this is going to be one of your friends who's the responsible one, the one that has a plan, the one that is like, here's what we're going to do from A to Z. And if F goes wrong, well, that sucks. They also tend to be really great managers, right? So these are going to be the people who are in middle and upper management who work so hard, and they got there because they just worked their ass off. But because of that, they're prone to burning themselves out, because often in these over performers, like, you're not teaching them how to take care of themselves too. You're teaching them that in order to get the attention, in order to be perfect, they have to over function and like parent everybody else. So because of that high level of stress, it also comes with a lot of anxiousness and perfection. If I'm not good enough, right? This tends to lead people into having an anxious, preoccupied attachment style. So you don't need to remember that right now, because we're going to go into it more later. But that oldest child syndrome, right? You're talking those kids who just grew up in life being so responsible. Like, okay, Sandra, calm down. You don't need to be so perfect. You're making the rest of us look terrible. Those people, they're your oldest kid. So if you were ever told you're the responsible one, congratulations. You got an unpaid internship into childhood. And basically, I mean, realistically, when it comes down to it, the oldest child is the family's beta test. They're like, let's just try everything that we think we want to do with our children on you and see how you turn out. And then when number 2 or number 3 or number 4 or number 5 come along, then we're feeling a little bit more like this rodeo is something we can manage. But every perfective parenting ideal, I'm not going to spank my children. I'm not going to cuss around them. I'm not going to allow them to experience disappointment. appointment. My child's not going to hit anyone. All of these unrealistic and completely ass backwards parenting ideals that we think that we can manage. Unfortunately, test driven on the oldest child. Congrats, you're the guinea pig. Then along comes middle child. The middle child, the middle child. So this is where I've always identified myself, right? I've always been like, oh yeah, I'm the middle child. And I was a middle child for like half of my childhood. And then, you know, life happened. So a lot of the times, like this middle child, these are the kids that get lost in like having to be responsible as the oldest child, and then like younger siblings being the spotlight because they're the babe. Yeah, I have a lot of opinions about that. Um, a lot of the times, middle kids come along and mom and dad are trying to figure out, especially when it's like a 3-kid environment, like mom and dad are trying to figure out on number 2, oh my God, how do I go from single child to juggling multiple? And like that tends to take away from the amount of attention that they get, especially in like early childhood. And then if another child comes along, then they're the baby, and parents are already used to juggling more than one, so that transition is not as tough. But like now it's the baby. So the baby gets all the attention because the baby has the highest level of need. I'm not sure why. Um, well, okay. So it looks like might be having some audio issues. So just give me a second here. Okay, so I think we're back. Hopefully audio is doing okay here. So we're on the middle child, right? So a lot of the time, like the middle kid gets lost between the oldest kid, who's the one expected to handle all of the responsibility, and the baby, who's expected to be like me, me, moo, moo, ga, 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 ga. Okay, so what does this like disappearing into the middle do for these kids? Well, first of all, they become highly empathetic. And that is because they don't have a leadership role per se. However, they're also not the baby, so they're not getting all the attention. And so the only way that they tend to find their way in a family is by being the conflict mediators. So these kids often get overlooked, and so they learn how to blend into the like family and not cause problems. But that internal need to not cause problems so that they're not like causing more conflict, they in turn become the one trying to solve the conflict experienced by other people. So this results in like high empathy, right? Sibling A is really, really upset because sibling C did something. So sibling B, the middle child, is going to try and help and fix it because they don't want sibling A to be hurting or upset. This tends to lead to really good negotiation skills, really good adaptability, a lot of learning how to creatively find their place in the family. A lot of the times, this means that the middle child had to become like a high performer as well. The only way they were getting attention was going to be if they were kind of adultified, if they were perfect, if they were participating in sports, things like that, and solving problems to make life easier for mom and dad. Like that is how they got their gold star. For me, this looked like kind of like taking care of my siblings in a way, or really it led more to me taking care of myself so I wasn't a burden. And because I feel like I was in the shadow. My older sister had a lot of behavioral issues. My younger brother was like daddy's little baby, who could do no wrong, right? I constantly didn't know where I fit. Like, did I have an older sibling role? Was I a provider in the family? Like, what did I do? I became a people pleaser. But the problem with being a people pleaser is what, right? Like, the problem with being a people pleaser is, what is your identity? People pleasing is not an identity. People pleasing is masking, basically. So, like, when you're constantly people pleasing, it leads you to feeling like nobody knows who you are because you're just too busy being what they need you to be. So, like, you tend to have this, like, feeling of, like, identity crisis. Like, who am I? Do the people who I live with even know who I am at my core? Growing up, what we notice is that this tends to lead to a lot of, like, resentment from feeling invisible between siblings. That can, like, create barriers to sibling relationships. It can also create barriers to parent-child relationships. As an adult, like, this is going to be your friend who gets along with everybody, who smooths out the team tension, who is always going the extra mile, but this is also the person that's overlooked. This is the one who's undervalued or invisible, and nobody even realizes how much they do until they're gone. And these people, because they are not seen, because they desperately want to just be recognized for what they contribute, for who they are as an individual, they often, and they aren't used to being in that spotlight, so when they are in that spotlight, they tend to fear that they're going to be rejected, or people are going to think that they're too much, right? And some themes here. And so they want to be seen, to be recognized, to be held for who they are. But then when they get that attention, they become avoidant and they become fearful of abandonment. And so this leads them to have what we call an anxious avoidant attachment style or a disorganized attachment style. Again, don't worry about that right now because we're not digging into attachment style in this episode. But keep in mind, like, middle child syndrome, it's like, let's see. Middle child syndrome is, I blend in to make life easier for everybody else, because if I don't, what's going to happen? It's like I fix all the problems for mom and dad so that they realize that I make their life better, so they'll give me attention. It's the friend of yours who constantly plays the fix it when there's conflict. They're the peacekeepers, or maybe they're the person that always is the glue, trying to make sure that nobody feels left out. These people, like, middle children, struggle with boundaries, like, hardcore, because they're so used to having to be what everybody else needs them to be in order to be the glue, and that it's like, I don't know who I am, and neither do these other people. And so all they want is to be seen for who they are, but then when people don't, because they're so used to blending and making themselves invisible, they start to get resentful. This happens in friend groups, it happens in the sibling relationships, happens with adult relationships. And it becomes a struggle because all they've ever wanted was to be valued for who and what they are. And so, like, the middle child is like, notice me, please, 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 don't forget me. But then they're also like, wait, if you notice me, you might not like me, so then you'll leave. So wait, no, don't notice me, right? And then it leads to this chaotic and swing between these two extremes, all the while trying to blend in and not be a burden to anyone. It's like middle children are like the Wi-Fi. You only notice them when they stop working. Like, I can't with that one. It's so relatable. The oldest child gets the rules, the youngest child gets the fun, and the middle child gets the hand-me-downs. Basically, middles were the family beta version of a participation trophy. Shout out to every 90s child ever. So, I've asked myself before, where in my life do I feel like I'm still fading into the background? Why do I keep bending myself to keep the peace instead of naming what I really want? How do I keep my empathy but not allow that to make me disappear into the crowd? So hey, if you've ever had to yell, "Hey, I'm right here," you're probably a middle child. And if you're like the Wi-Fi and nobody notices that you're gone until you stop going, welcome to middle child syndrome. So where does that leave us, right? What's next? Middle and then youngest. All right, youngest children. I cannot say that I have any memory whatsoever of being the youngest child. So this one, I don't have a lot of relatable things on it, but by the time the youngest or younger children come around, you've gotten to this point where mom and dad are usually more relaxed. The rules are a little bit looser. The parents are relying on the other kids to help caregive for the younger kids so they're not as attention focused. Babies or youngest children are often they're babies. Baby, oh, my little baby. Oh, you little baby, right? Mom and dad talk like that. And then they're like, middle child, why are you doing that? Or oldest child, where are you? What are you doing? Get over here. Come help, right? Because of that, the babies get to be the fun one, right? And they also tend to get the fun side of the parent. This often leads to personality traits like being playful and charming, being high risk takers, often because mom and dad and siblings are there to catch them when they fall, being highly spontaneous because they've never had to be the one to be in control, which leads to a high level of creativity as well, right? How many young children are the youngest kids in the family are the artists or are they don't have a job, oldest kiddo's got a job at 16, middle kiddo's got a job at 17 or 18, a youngest kid is 25 and still living in the home unemployed. That wasn't very nice. I shouldn't have said that. Not all youngest children are like that. I will say that out loud. That was maybe a little bit of bias. So what kinds of wounds, or what's the flip side to those strengths, right? So being babied all the time gives youngest children a high level of entitlement. Whee! Talk about they know what they want and they get it, or they throw a temper tantrum, right? Think Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and all of those entitled children. Yeah, we just watched that the other day. Max loved it, but I was just like, dude, this is so cringe. Youngest kids are often super dependent on others in order to survive, basically, because they've never, again, had to be the responsible ones. So these are the kids who don't know how to make themselves breakfast, who have to rely on everybody to do everything for them. Nobody takes them seriously. So, because of that playful, charming, creative side that they get, they tend to struggle with insecurities around people not taking them seriously. When they finally are, maturing and becoming more serious in life, everyone just thinks they're still joking. So they're like, ha, 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 you're going to be a doctor. No way. Ha, ha, ha. Well, they wouldn't want to be a doctor, right? But there's also the flip side of, sometimes being the youngest child leads to, a complete and utter avoidance of all responsibility.
This is like when you're talking about like that movie Step Brothers, where they're like 40 and living in mom and dad's house, and mom and dad are like, get the fuck out, bro. Like, you're adults. Get a job. Get out. And I would say, like, I've seen youngest kind of go like that, one of those two ways where they're like, you know, they can't be taken seriously because they're the baby. They've always been the fun one, but they're not mature, or they completely want absolutely nothing to do with maturity. Um, so, like, how does this look like when they're an adult? So, these are going to be your friends who are the life of the party, the natural entertainer, the ones who maybe are like, yeah, let's do a keg stand, right? Um, but these individuals are also the ones who run away from responsibility or intimacy, right? So the youngest might be that kid who runs away when things start to feel serious, because seriousness in relationships feels like responsibility. So that leads this individual to be a avoidant dismissive attachment style. They keep things they keep things light, they resist emotional demands, they might fear responsibility or closeness. Um, but I mean, realistically, youngest children are that life of the party, happy-go-lucky kid, right? They are the spoiled ones. So if you ever grew up hearing, you're spoiled, and then your response was, thank you, you're probably the youngest children. And if you think about it, the youngest kids are like the family dessert. Everyone loves them. No one takes them seriously like they do the dinner. All right. Moving on to archetype number 4, the only child. Again, no insight into what this looks like in real life for me, because as we discussed, middle child, oldest child, like there was no only child syndrome here. But I've met so many of them. So, only children. Oi, I would say, while there are some good strengths that come along with them, the wounds that these people experience, oi, man, it makes me feel terrible. And they're so hard. So as a therapist, I've worked with people who are only kids, and only child syndrome. And, like, they battle such a difficult set of problems or wounds, core wounds, that most of us can't even understand. So the problem with being the only child was you were the sole focus of the parental attention, right? You got every ounce of attention, expectation, um, criticism, praise, all of it. Every ounce of it was on you. But because of that, being the only child, you also only mostly interacted with adults. And you were held to adult expectations, right? So you think this is like gonna be like that only child who goes to a fancy restaurant with mom and dad at the age of 7, can sit at a table with their fork in their hand and their pinky out, and knows all of the expectations of sitting at a 5-star restaurant dinner, because that was bred into them. Because only children often are brought along with mom and dad, right? Mom and dad don't stop living the adult life. They just bring their child with them. And so children that live as only children tend to be held to these often impeccably high expectations from a really young age. Now that does give them these strengths of like being independent, being very articulate, very ambitious, very confident, very mature. But much like the oldest child, there's a very large like tendency for perfectionism and fear of failure. Because all of that responsibility is put on them. And so those wounds, though, also include loneliness, because not having other kids, being really uncomfortable with not being the center of attention. And also, the one that I think probably is the most difficult is rigid self-reliance. I can think of a few people I know with that. Like, being determined to not let other people help you. So much so that you will just destroy relationships because you are so uncomfortable with being helped. You see it as failure, you see it as having to share the spotlight, you know. These are going to be your friends who are kind of like the lone wolf, who kind of just show up after, you know, for the party, but they're not really there helping do things, because when they are, they just kind of go off into a corner. They're often super, super ambitious. They're the leaders. They might be high up in organization. And the higher they go, the better they tend to be, because the less they have to work with other people. They are great at working alone. But they'll be like, no, I'll write the whole paper and I'll put your name on it, and then you just agree that we did it together. Got it? Yep, okay. And that creates a ton of problems in relationships, right? Because what do we know about people who have difficulties with sharing, difficulties with sharing the spotlight, difficulties with being helped? These are often people who also have difficulties being loved, right? In adulthood, this turns into people who tend to just be self-reliant and refuse to allow people to get close enough. These are the people who have fantastic boundaries, but so much so that they build these walls and set these unrealistic expectations and like high standards, because that's what was expected of them when they were in their foundational years. So like, while they have these really great like leadership dynamics, they really, really, really struggle with like letting people close to them, because they never had to do that. Being an only child is like being raised in single player mode. You know, they didn't have to fight for the front seat because they were the front seat. Could you imagine never having to be like, I call shotgun? They didn't have to share. And because of that level of loneliness, a lot of the times they grow up with imaginary friends. And then they tell them that they're fired because they're not cooking the imaginary pancakes right. Like, the youngest child, not youngest child, but only child, is like so put together. But could you imagine how miserable your childhood would have been if you were perfect? I can't. So, if you played Monopoly with your parents as a kid, and they didn't let you win, you're probably an only child. And if you felt like life was single player mode and you're running the game, but it gets pretty lonely, again, I'm sorry. So only children tend to lean what we just call avoidant. And this means that they are self-sufficient, they're self-protective, they struggle with deep intimacy, again, pushing people away, putting up those walls so they can't really like get there. So that tends to be kind of like how they react. So now we've gone through the core four. I want to get into a couple of bonus archetypes now, because these are things that can be afflicted on any of these other archetypes, the core four. So these are bonus, because not only could you be an only child, but you could also be the lost child. We'll get into that in a second. So in terms of like these bonus archetypes, there's like 4 of them. Some of them overlap a little bit. You could have more than one because of changing childhood dynamics. Maybe you are the scapegoat, but you're also the golden child. So the 4 bonus archetypes are the surrogate parent or the parentified child, the lost child, the golden child, and the scapegoat. So starting with the surrogate parent or the parentified child, we've all heard that term, like, you're parentified, blah, blah, blah. You're having to do things that you shouldn't because maybe your parents are absent or struggling. So these, like I said earlier in the episode, these archetypes tend to be related to ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. And so you're going to notice here as I'm going through it, I'm going to be going over maybe these traumas that you were expected to get through without the appropriate support. So, a parentified child comes from a household where the parent is absent or struggling usually. This could be like addiction or mental health, or a parent who has to work because there's only a single parent household and mom is or dad is constantly having to work to provide for the home. This puts that child in the role of having to become a caregiver for themselves or their siblings, but also can like feel like they're having to caregive for their parents. So say if you have a chronically ill parent, you might become parentified because you're having to do the grocery shopping, you're having to prepare meals for your parent. This can lead to kids and adults who are really nurturing, or we call them wise beyond their years. They're super dependable, the natural leader. But in the flip side here, you've got little to no childhood, probably a ton of anxiety because you're constantly unsure whether or not, things in life are going to be there the next minute you need them. Often these kids also struggle with being taken care of because they were the one that had to take care of others. And so they give instead of receive. And this is going to be a big red flag in boundaries. So parentified children, or children who overgive, often again are those people pleasers. Shout out, because this kind of trauma often lends people into careers like therapy, social working, and nursing. They are that strong but overburdened, overworked because they choose to be person. And a lot of the time they will confuse love with service. So, or they'll show I love you by doing things for you. But they also tend to be very isolative. They don't often let people in to know how they're feeling or what's going on. They have difficulties with intimacy and they avoid conflict. And they have a really hard time speaking about what they need. These are going to be your people who are those dreamy creatives. Maybe they're the artists, the solo entrepreneurs, or those who exist in their inner world a lot, daydreaming. And they just kind of blend because for them, distance from anything intimate is safety. So if you made your siblings breakfast before you made your own, you might have been the parent in your family. Or if some kids got chores and others got allowance, well, then you might be the parentified kid that got a full-time job and no paycheck. And I mean, hey, if you've never, met childhood, you might have been too busy raising your parents. I know. I'm kind of pointing some sharp pencils at these people, huh? That's not very kind to me. Okay, the next archetype is the lost child. So this comes from a child who has a ton of family chaos. So that might be parents who are constantly struggling or constantly fighting, or there's just a lot of drama and chaos in the family dynamic. So in order to feel safe, this child will disappear into their hobbies, their books, their fantasies. For them, survival was invisibility. If your family forgot you at the dinner table or you got left at the restaurant, maybe you might be the lost child. Yeah, sure, you're going to be independent, imaginative, creative, have excellent observation skills, but you're also going to be super isolative, have a really hard time with anxiety and intimacy. You're going to hate conflict because nobody ever showed you how to be in conflict. And you're not going to know how to tell anyone what you need because you were invisible. Nobody ever paid attention to what you needed. So, yeah, like, dude, that just sucks. um, so the lost child is like the ninja of the family system. Silent, invisible, always. If you aren't grounded for breaking curfew because no one noticed you left, you might be the lost child. Oh man, that's a rough one. Sorry. Sorry if that's a little ouch. Um, all right, number 3, the golden child. Ooh, right? So, golden child, this is the crowned the good one. This is the one that mom and dad talk about first. They are praised for their achievement. However, love feels conditional for success. So they feel like in order to be loved, they have to be successful. So this also often leads to like driven and polished, you know, kids who get the blue ribbon and the first place medal every time because they are perfect high achievers with high levels of discipline. However, give them a second place trophy and they suddenly feel completely worthless. The whole world is falling apart and they failed. Even though there was 100 other kids, second place is failure. This is the kid or the person who tells you if you're not first, you're last. Right? This is going to be your star student, your star employee, but they're so critical of themselves, right? Oh, I'm performing at the highest level above all of the other people, but I'm not perfect and I need to do more. These people often will like confuse their level of achievement with who they are. Like think Olympic athlete, right? Like if you look at this Olympic athlete and you say, well, what do you like to do? I like to swim. No. What do you like to do? I really like to swim. Like no, like that's your achievement, that's your crowning victory. But who are you? You're not just a swimmer. Like no. And if that's what you've done with your life, if you turned your entire identity into an achievement, well, you're gonna feel really lousy if you're not perfect. You're gonna have a ton of anxiety. You're gonna fear failing because fear of failing means that you aren't what you've identified with. Who are you? If you're not perfect, who are you? If, like, if you were terrified to come home with a B, welcome to the Golden Child Club. You're like a trophy, shiny on the outside and heavy to carry on the inside. You aren't loved for being, you are loved for achieving. So, yeah, let's sit with that. All right. The last bonus archetype is the scapegoat. So, this is the kid who was blamed for things that you didn't even know happened, and nobody believes you when you said you didn't. You're probably the scapegoat. You get blamed for dysfunction, you get labeled the problem child, even though you're often the truth teller, right? But that might mean that you're bleh, you're a rebel. You might be labeled a rebel. You know, you are resilient, you're independent, you're outspoken, you're intuitive about what's going on behind the closed doors. But you're also shameful. You've got a ton of anger. You constantly feel alienated. You don't really know who you are because everybody else has labeled you as something and they don't believe you when you tell them that's not what you are. These are going to be people who go into their adult lives being what we call a trailblazer, somebody who creates the different, the disruptors, the leaders who rebel against authority. But on the flip side of that, they struggle with trust. Right? Like, stand up to the man. But if you can't stand up to the man, who are you going to trust? It can't trust you because you're against me? You're going to make me the problem. All right. Well, if that sounds like you, then you're probably the scapegoat. Like, you're the family's favorite trash can. Everything that goes wrong ends up in your lap. Like, you're the scapegoat. Your sister stole the Oreos and put the evidence in your bed, and you tell your parents, no, I didn't eat the Oreos. And they're like, well, here's the evidence. And you're like, but I didn't eat them. Somebody else must have put them here. And they don't believe you. You're the scapegoat. You're invisible until they need somebody to put the problem on. Right? So why did I even want to get into these archetypes, right? Why did I need to spend 45 minutes telling you about how our sibling roles crafted who we are? Well, that's because, to be quite honest, these roles that we played, these roles that were assigned to us beyond our own belief, on our own due diligence, our own doing, they influence every area of our lives, right? They influence our friendships. Who do we become in the group? They influence our workplaces on how we perform in teams. They influence how we seek love or connection. I ask you, like, how am I choosing to show up? Or am I still like letting my childhood archetype write the script of my life? I know for me, my blend of experiences, in my life, I would say I've experienced, young, middle, and oldest child syndrome. I've got a nice healthy dose of what the fuck is that shit. I was also very parentified. I was lost, and the golden child. I experienced all of those at some point in my life. And as the adult, in the adult relationship that I've had with my siblings and my parents, I became the scapegoat. We'll tell more about those stories later. But, like, what's funny is even as you age into adulthood and you still maintain this hierarchy or this archetype in your parental and your sibling relationships, you can still take on new types of bonus archetypes, or even a change in like your core, the core four. If you're the middle child and the oldest child dies, you become the oldest child. You take on that responsibility. If you're a youngest and an oldest and one of them dies, they become an only child, and that often will lead to types of attention changing, right? So like it can change. But these roles that we take often are paired very, very closely with how we're attached to other people. Like I mentioned earlier, that each one of these roles had a usual, a normal attachment style. The oldest child is often anxious, preoccupied attachment. The middle child is often anxious, avoidant, or disorganized. You have youngest kids are typically avoidant and they're dismissive. And then only children are typically just straight avoidance, man. But then each of those bonus roles can cause, different types of attachment. Surrogate or the parentified child is an anxious attachment. The lost child becomes avoidant. The scapegoat becomes disorganized. So you can mix and match these different level of like attachments with sibling roles. And then in that you get this very complex mess of identity. And this identity that not just forms your childhood, but greatly increases your adulthood and the different like problems that you face in adulthood relationships. And so I wanted to get into it because, first of all, I'm dealing with so much attachment dysregulation in my own life right now. It's like highly prevalent in my brain. So this is a great way for me to like work out things in my brain that I'm experiencing and working through. But also, it's such a great conversation to have. And it's one I want you to have with your friends. It's one I want you to have with your siblings, because it takes two to tango, and it takes two to work on attachment healing. And the way we work through attachment and healing is by becoming triggered and working through it in a more healthier way. And so, we have the core types of attachment. We have anxious and avoidant or disorganized. And then we have secure. And then we have this fifth bonus attachment style that there's not as much out there on, called earned secure. And earned secure is the silver lining. It is the hope on the horizon. It is when you have an unsecure attachment style and you work through those attachment styles so that you can earn a secure attachment to your partners, your friends, your family, within your life. And it is like, if you have somebody who is an earned secure attachment, cherish them, because the amount of work they had to go through to overcome attachment wounds was just absolutely bonkers. And if you take on the growth in this area of your life, you're going to really just cherish those around you with secure attachment or earned secure attachment. So some core facts about attachment, why should you listen? Why should you listen to the next 5 mini episodes? Well, attachment theory, just so you know, was first studied by John Bowlby in the 1940s and 50s, and then expanded by Mary Ainsworth when she got to her strange situation experiments. We could talk more about those later. But the core facts say that by the age of 1 year old, most children are already showing an identifiable attachment style. So by 12 months old, before we are consciously able to even make decisions on behalf of ourselves, we are already showing signs of being anxious, avoidant, disorganized, secure. Attachment is formed because of safety and survival first, and love second. So you can have these amazingly loving parents. However, if they present with different dynamics in the household, they can create an unsecure attachment in their very loved child. They say, according to statistics, that roughly 50% of the people in our population are secure, comfortable with closeness and independence. I honestly think that's kind of bullshit. But I don't know. Maybe it's just who I surround myself with. Roughly 20% of the population is anxious. About 25% of the population is believed to be avoidant. And only 5 to 10% of the population is believed to be what's called disorganized. So I think the nicest way I've seen disorganized described was somebody who said a disorganized attachment is like anxious and avoidant attachment together on steroids. That doesn't do it justice. I don't really like any description of disorganized avoidant. But one of the best things is like, I love you, don't see me, don't leave me. Let me just exist here. I don't actually want you to look at me. But I'll be here. Unless you look at me and then I'm gone. So your anxious people, yeah, they're the text messengers. Your avoidant people, those are like, I'm here and I'm gone. Your disorganized fans, those are your romantic roller coaster engineers. I'm up and I'm down, I'm up and I'm down. And secure attachment, those are the unicorns. They're the unicorns of attachment. The kind of things that you need to know though, like, first of all, you are not your attachment style. Your attachment style is trained in you through situations outside of your control, and it isn't fixed. You can change it. You can go to therapy. You can engage in safe relationships. You can increase your self-awareness to earn that secure attachment if you don't have a secure attachment. Healing avoidant or anxious attachment starts with awareness, turns to regulation, which brings up new choices and new ways of dealing, coping, and behaving. Attachment can often be painted as a a wound or a struggle, but it also is a strength. I've talked before about how I love hard, I'm anxious, but that made me an empath and a people pleaser, which again are negative things inherently of themselves, but they're also positive things, right? So we want to know about our attachment because our attachment spills over into our relationships, our friendships, our workplace, and it can really impact like how we just behave as individuals. So, I want to close up this episode here because we've talked about so much. But, I want you to walk away from this little mini series, this little mini episodes, and the foundation episode with an understanding that even though these roles might have been given to me, even though these roles might have been placed upon me, these roles are not and do not have to be my identity. And during my conversation with my friend where we laughed about me just being that fucked up, I realized I was making them, my identity. The middle child empathy and the oldest child responsibility equals a therapist's destiny. Now I just get paid to untangle the dynamics for other people instead of having to do my own. My role shaped me, but it doesn't define me. And my awareness is my freedom. So, if you're still here, you are a rock star. Where's your participation trophy? And next time we're going to dive deep into the anxious attachment style. These are going to be the overgivers of the world. So don't worry. We're going to get to every style. I'm going to rip you apart and put you back together. I'm going to tell you everything that's wrong with you. And also everything that's beautiful about who you are. So you'll hear your story. Don't worry. It's there. We're going to start with anxious attachment as coming up here shortly. But, I want you to remember and I want you to know that this is your time. This is your space. This is your place. I want you to unmask, untangle, and shine your weird into the world like a beacon. Until next time, my friends, stay weird, and I'll talk to you later.